Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to see, well, I don't really see you, but it's nice to see so many names familiar to us, both in Singapore and abroad. As Sarah has said, some of you are not members, so we're very pleased to see you join us. The SIIA is a membership-run organization, and if you wish to join, do let Sarah and her team know. It's a kind of a good thing to have Oisan on in two ways. First, we've been following Malaysia actually very closely. The country is very important to the region and of course to us as neighbors. And in the last 2 years, we actually spent a lot of time looking at the new politics. Oisan has been our senior fellow for much of this period, and today is actually his fourth seminar for us. So we're quite, as the title suggests, looking at an ongoing saga. I'm not sure it's Game of Thrones or what Netflix series it is, but it's something that we really will continue to watch. The second thing is, I guess, we've been doing a lot of work on COVID-19, not so much the health policies, but on the economic and political issues regarding ASEAN and the countries in the group. For example, next week, we'll look at Indonesia, but always with that political economic lens. And I think that's where looking at Malaysia today will be particularly interesting. There were issues coming into the present situation, and there is COVID-19 coming on top of it to, in a way, affect not only the health policies, but some of those economic and political issues. And that's the remit we've given Oisan. Oisan, we're going to have maybe three clusters of questions. The first one is really, what are the sort of main takeaways of recent events in Malaysia? You know, sometimes things happen so quickly there and in sort of backroom discussions that we are struggling to catch up with what is the latest. Would you like to update us?
Oh yeah, thank you, Simon, for hosting the seminar again. I think over the last 2 months, as Malaysia was going through this so-called movement control orders in Singapore, we call it circuit breaker. The political scene has quietened down significantly, but as the parliament opened its session again last Monday, and in anticipation of that, Malaysian politics sort of heated up again. And the person who sort of launched the first salvo was none other than Dr. Mahathir himself. In my last presentation, you may recall that I mentioned Dr. Mahathir had a rather ambivalent attitude, even though he was deposed as Prime Minister and his erstwhile deputy, in the party, namely Muhyiddin, replacing him as Prime Minister. But then he was still a bit ambivalent about whether he should support this new government or he should sort of continue to work together with Anwar Ibrahim, whom he definitely did not and does not like. I think over the past 2 months, there must have been a lot of, for example, the contacts between the two sides, between the Mahathir camp as well as the Muhyiddin camp. From Mahathir's perspective, I think he is happy to accommodate that sort of, shall we say, Malay-dominated government, but then he is not happy with some figures in the coalition, figures who nevertheless are very powerful within the largest coalition party, within the new ruling coalition, namely UMNO. So even though Mahathir and Muhyiddin, they have roughly the same political aim and aspiration as to how Malaysia should go forward as a country, but well, from the Muhyiddin perspective, I think he needed the support of precisely those people whom Dr. Mahathir does not quite like, in order for him to secure his position as Prime Minister. So the upshot, of course, will be that, well, I think the two are now more definitively, now in Malaysia nowadays, I have to use all these qualifiers in terms of politics. I want to say more definitively sort of split among themselves. I mean, between the two of them, such that Dr. Mahathir put forward a motion of no confidence in the parliament. It was accepted by the Speaker of the House, but well, we are a Westminster parliamentary system whereby the government of the day has a lot of power in terms of deciding the actual agenda of the parliament. And Mr. Muhyiddin, of course, decided not to, and understandably so, not to put the motion by Dr. Mahathir onto at least the first day of the new parliamentary session. But because Dr. Mahathir put forward that motion, well, from the Muhyiddin side, he has to do something in a sense, in retaliation, or what I would call a clipping of the wings of Dr. Mahathir. And that manifested itself in Dr. Mahathir's son, Mukhris Mahathir, being deposed as the Chief Minister of Kedah. And the latest is, of course, that even in Sabah, my homestay of Sabah, where I am now, there are rumors flying that the state government could be toppled sometime in the near future. So people ask me, how would that be possible? Because the state government in Sabah commands more than 2/3 majority in the state assembly. Well, it has happened before in the 1980s and 1990s, whereby the federal government, by, shall we say, material inducement, brought down, I think, at least 2 Sabah state governments. So, so this sort of sniping from the side, clipping of the wings of Dr. Mahathir would go on. And of course, Dr. Mahathir would also be doing similar things, or at least from his limited resources now, trying to do similar things to Mr. Muhyiddin. So as we said, the saga indeed continues in that respect.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Oisan. I think that was a very good precise response to that question. What then, if the parliamentary sitting does go ahead at some time, I mean, in the coming weeks or months, what is likely to happen? Both if it succeeds, but also if it fails. I mean, will this coalition against Muhyiddin continue? I mean, the remnants of the Pakatan Harapan.
Well, I think as you were a member of parliament before, Simon, you would perhaps be more conversant in parliamentary procedure than myself. But as I understand it, even if the government were to try to continue to block this motion by Dr. Mahathir, which I think is perfectly within their power to do so according to constitutional tradition. But the same Westminster constitutional tradition also dictates that, well, at some point the government were to put forward some sort of budget, for example, or even a supplementary budget to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and so on. And if that budget motion or supplementary budget bill and so on is voted down, that should be construed as a no confidence on the government of the day, and the government of the day should resign, right? So at some point, Muhyiddin would have to so-called face the music in terms of facing even just a constructive vote of no confidence. But I think my main contention here is Muhyiddin actually does not have to worry so much about this sort of attempts to chip away his power, to snipe at him from the opposition by all these motions of no confidence and so on. I think he would have to worry more about his own coalition partner, namely and chiefly UMNO. I think UMNO is doing its best to chip away Muhyiddin's power, to undermine Muhyiddin. But they are doing so in a very precarious manner. I think they would still like to, of course, keep the government alive, by means of still retaining the majority in parliament, and perhaps even pinching a few members of parliament from the opposition, which I think they are able to do so. And at the same time, not having or slowly and gradually sort of push Muhyiddin down from the premiership, and perhaps substitute that with somebody from, for example, UMNO. You know, so the Muhyiddin's position now, political position, is I think strangely akin to what Dr. Mahathir was experiencing over the last 2 years. Namely, well, the coalition would still like to be government, but they don't like him to be the prime minister. In the Pakatan Harapan case, they like Anwar to be the prime minister, right? So, well, that's why nowadays you have very strange bedfellows in politics in Malaysia. And just to further answer your question in terms of if such a motion does go through, some sort of motion of no confidence, including a non-passage of a budget bill and so on, in theory, I think the constitution does spell out explicitly the government of the day should resign, but that does not automatically guarantee a general election. The king, in all his wisdom, could appoint another MP, be it Zahid or Mahathir or Anwar, to be the next prime minister, and ask that person to cobble together a new majority coalition. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you've said from the legal point of view, the constitutional point of view, is roughly correct. You know, I'm in Singapore, but you know, my knowledge of the Malaysian constitution is a cause of what you've said. I think the interesting point you've made also at this juncture is that, in a way, in the 2 years, we've shifted from the popular politics of the election to parliamentary politics. And though the motion of parliament is the key thing, you're suggesting that, in a way, moving into a backroom politics. You know, it reminds me a bit of what people describe Japan in the 1980s, 1990s, where oftentimes the LDP is still in charge, but, you know, in back rooms decides who the minister will be. So factions belong to different people. Yeah.
It would appear that such a, shall we say, a deep state scenario, it's slowly emerging, that there's some still at this point rather nefarious forces which are, in a sense, pulling the strings behind the scene, trying to put together coalitions at very short notices and so on.
Yes.
Of course, one is tempted to say it's the old reactionary guards and so on who are doing that, but it also includes people such as Asmin and so on, who for the longest period of time, you know, were considered up and coming, the new generation. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. The third set of questions, I guess, relates to the question of the, you know, sort of the imposition of COVID-19. Actually, Malaysia has done fairly well. I think, as you mentioned in the last talk, they left a lot of this thing to their civil servants. And I think your Director General has done quite well in health part. And so the numbers have come down nicely. Another thing that people noted is that Malaysia, despite having an all-Malay government, has been quite tough on Ramadan activities, you know, cutting down on the charamas and cutting down on the breaking of fasts and even the fairs, and limiting the public exposure. How are you reading this? How else is COVID-19 a factor in the politics that's emerging after these lockdowns?
Well, for the longest period of time, for up to 2 months, it was actually a dampening factor, right? So people did not politic a lot. In the Malaysian context, politicking would involve a lot of, shall we say, physical contacts. This would involve all these huge popular rallies and smaller size charamas, and as well as even people going for what we discuss as backroom dealings and so on. They typically would like to sit down over a cup of coffee or tea to do so. So the past 2 months has seen a drastic drop in this. But I think as a festive season approaches, Well, the politicians will of course like to make use of it to do more of this what I would call physical politicking, right? So I'm I hesitate to say there's some sort of political motive behind this, but certainly all this prohibition against, in a sense, physical contact would again sort of damp down a lot of this politicking that would have been going on if not for the imposition of all these prohibitions. Yeah.
Yes. For example, in the past, the opposition often had street assemblies and allied to NGOs like Bersih, etc. This is obviously not possible under the present lockdown.
Indeed, I don't think people have the I don't think people have a stomach for another Bersih at the moment, even without COVID-19. But even just regular seminars, regular rallies, and so on would not be able to be held during this festive season and beyond. So let's say Dr. Mahathir would like to go for a road show around the country, right? He would not be able to do so. Yeah.
And besides the dampening effect, does the relative well handling of COVID-19 help the incumbent government? Because I mean, there were concerns that, literally as the government was being formed out of nothing, because they weren't a pre-existing coalition, the impact of COVID became so clear in Malaysia. And now we're coming out and it seems better. And the government
I think the feelings are somewhat divided. In terms of the nitty-gritty technical aspects of containing COVID-19, I think people largely attribute that to the professional bureaucracy, the medical personnel, this Director General of Medical Services and so on. Now, when it comes to the socio-economic impacts, I think the opinions are somewhat divided. Muhyiddin essentially adopted a lot of what I would say Najib would have done, with Muhyiddin and myself having both worked for Najib before, namely to make sure that the so-called B40, those with the 40% lowest income group, they will be able to be tightened over this 2 months period by means of outright cash handouts as well as other sort of rajes and so on. But I think for the especially the small and medium enterprises, a lot of them are extremely displeased and up in arms because, this sort of responsibility to take care of the B40, besides being shouldered by the government, it's also to a large extent shifted to the shoulders of these small and medium enterprises, in the sense that they are strongly discouraged from firing their staff, their employees, but at the same time, the government's subsidies of wages and so on, it's not commensurate with the prohibition against firing employees and so on. So for SMEs, I think a lot of them are extremely displeased. Yeah.
So a follow-up question, and then we'll open the floor. The follow-up question is, how much is the pressure for the government to really ramp up that easing of lockdown measures to go faster?
I think there is a lot of popular sentiments for that to open up the economy. For the B40s, a lot of them are day wages. Namely, if they don't go to work today, they don't have income today. So and for the SMEs too, you can't ask them to, in a sense, close shop for 2 months at the same time still pay rents and pay the employees and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure for Muhyiddin to open up the economy even more fully. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think there are many more questions to ask you, like about the latest settlement of the 1MDB cases, etc. But let's go to the participants. We've got some 45, 46 participants. I hope you've all been briefed and absorbed the information about how to do this. I got two questions at the moment on the chat. But similarly, if you want to raise a hand, please let me know and we'll open the microphones to you. I think the first question really comes from Ricky Au about the economy. How is Malaysia going to bounce back? I want to ask you this, Oisan, but of course, as a backgrounder, just to say that first, one question is, the dependence on oil and gas, where, future oil and gas prices have gone like that. The second, of course, is even palm oil, another major income earner for Malaysia, is soft and weak, given the overall part. So, and of course, the question of how much reserves Malaysia has got to deal with this. What's your sense?
Yeah, okay. On the commodity side, we don't. Well, actually, I'm just going to divide my answer into the commodity side as well as the sort of manufacturing trade side. But on both sides, we don't have a lot of control over all this because, well, we don't have a lot of say over the oil and gas price. We don't have a lot of say over palm oil price and so on. In terms of oil and gas, it hit the government's revenues significantly. But in terms of the normal folks, it's actually good news because people would have to pay less petrol, pay less for petrol, for electricity. Even the manufacturers, they're very happy because they don't have to pay for so much electricity. Palm oil, there was some sort of good news yesterday. India is resuming purchasing of our palm oil. Some say because Dr. Mahathir stepped down because he was rather vocal about Indian domestic politics and so on. I mean, domestic handling of certain affairs. In terms of manufacturing, also it depends on how fast the worldwide manufacturing chain would rebound. If China rebounds fast, the United States, I don't know. I mean, the other day the chairman of the Fed was talking about 20% shrinkage. At least during the second quarter in the United States. So as long as the worldwide manufacturing chain picks up, Malaysia would follow suit because we are an almost indispensable segment of this, of this chain. Yeah.
But short of that, I guess there's no easy answer for Malaysia, as for most of us, obviously.
If you're expecting, for example, more government stimulus packages, I think it's difficult to come by because, well, they have to pass a supplementary budget. Right? And I think Mr. Muhyiddin is not very keen to do so at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so for both political reasons as well as how much cash they've got in the budget, it may be difficult for Malaysia to do much more than they have already.
Yeah, well, we have a sizable reserve, not as much as Singapore. I have been urging the power that be to perhaps draw upon them, but I don't think that they are very keen on doing that as well. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the question I mentioned. Raymond Yee wants to ask a little bit about the hunger in the UMNO and other parts of PN for positions, and also the trials of corruption, the two big issues, I guess, in the government camp now.
Well, political appointments are, of course, very usual. Even the Pakatan Harapan, where they came into power, they did the same thing. But well, conversely speaking, I think Pakatan Harapan government, they have a trust deficit in terms of their, shall we say, racially and religiously supremacist credentials. They have a trust deficit on that in the views of a lot of voters. But in the views of a lot of many other voters, the more urban crowd, for example, Pakatan Harapan would have more trust credit instead of deficit in terms of the people been appointed into various GOCs and so on, even those politicians, they are widely perceived to be much more qualified and acting in the best interest of the country and so on. Whereas the UMNO political appointees, unfortunately, I think do not enjoy the same degree of trust in terms of they managing all these GOC well and so on. And therein lies the worries of a lot of businesses, investors, and so on, that all these quite important GOCs, which are supposed to, for example, monopolize certain sectors of the Malaysian economy, they are put in the hands of some political appointees who are perceived as being not well qualified.
Yes.
Yeah. Then the other thing about the settlement.
On that point of GLCs, I just want to remind us all that in a way, this is the sort of another cycle, right? When the Mahathir government came in as well, he got rid of a lot of GLCs.
That's right. Yeah, but his appointees. That's right. But his appointees are, shall we say, more convincing to a lot of businesses and investors. Yeah. So.
Your next point, go ahead.
The next point is about, I think, this out of court settlement between the prosecution, the Malaysian prosecution, with Najib's stepson on 1MDB. Yes. Again, it depends on what demographic you are talking to. To the urban and more elitist crowd, it is testimonial to the current government's in cohort with and in collusion with Najib and his people and so on. But to a lot of folks who are diehard supporters of Najib, and they number quite significantly, well, it's a vindication at the list of what they perceive as political persecution by the Pakatan Harapan administration. So a really divided view depending on which demographic you're speaking to.
So is the dropping of the charge with the stepson a kind of testing of the water for the big case?
That would be a lot of, that would be the opinion of a lot of those who are against doing it, right? That it is but the first step towards eventually dropping all charges against Najib and others. But yesterday there was a little twist to this, namely the stepson might actually turn so-called crown witness, may actually turn witness for the prosecution, in which case, well, if you are looking from a political point of view, well, that perhaps is a saving grace for the new administration. Namely, well, we are doing it, but in order for him to testify against bigger fish.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. It's an interesting ongoing saga. One aspect, subplot, or maybe even some cases, most exciting plot.
Yeah.
There are actually quite a few questions that are coming up. A number of them relate to some of the things we've said already, but in more detail.
Okay.
One of them we've just done is about the Najib trial and the present positions. To go on from there, I've got a question that talks about keeping UMNO united. How hard will it be to keep UMNO and PN as a formal coalition?
Okay. Well, let's first talk about UMNO. UMNO has proved its resilience, incredible resilience, just over the past 2 years. You may recall that after losing the last general election, UMNO seemed to be at the verge of disintegration, with a lot of MPs crossing over to Dr. Mahathir's Bersatu Party and so on. And I think some of my colleagues, not from SIIA, were writing about, the imminent demise of UMNO and so on. But look at what happens now. Less than 2 years, right? UMNO has bounced back and become the largest party within the ruling coalition. So I think for UMNO, as long as the distribution of various political largesse is satisfactory, the various factions or warlords within UMNO would still come together for a common goal of to either stay in government or come back to government. Now, the larger Perikatan Nasional, on the other hand, I think is slightly more precarious. Number one, because as we discussed just now, UMNO is continuing to snipe at Muhyiddin to try to bring down Muhyiddin, but not bringing down the government, number one. And it's not just UMNO doing that. Various other, shall we say, coalition partners are doing, well, they are not doing similar things, but they are putting forth their demands. Another big faction is, for example, the Sarawak coalition, right? The so-called GPS, the coalition of parties in Sarawak, which is supporting this new government. They are also clamoring for more oil revenues. They are clamoring for more devolution of powers, which they think in the first place properly belong to them, and so on. And if Muhyiddin does not balance these competing demands and interests well, at least his own premiership would be in question. And
Yes.
sometimes some of these coalition partners, they might also do what we call grandstanding, saying, well, we are going to jump to the other side if you don't satisfy these demands and so on. Well, then you will bring the whole coalition into jeopardy. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Also, I wanted to take us into East Malaysia and Sabah in a while.
Okay.
But right now, I want to follow up still on the Qatar national side. And the question about, you mentioned about how UMNO is not really just one view. There are fringes in the coalition that might snipe at Muhyiddin to bring him down. I want to ask you, on behalf of Kiona Lu, how much Islam plays a factor in that? Are they unhappy with the un-Islamic character of PN's COVID-19 policies in keeping those restraints on the charamas, etc., or breaking of fast?
Well, because, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Because this government has as one of its component party, namely the PAS party or the Islamist party. So in a sense, it's very difficult then to criticize this government as rolling out policies which are un-Islamic, not religious enough, and so on, because, well, it has a stamp of approval of PAS, and PAS is widely considered to be the authority, whether politically or spiritually, of Islam in this country. So I think a lot of this erstwhile sort of criticism as the government's, shall we say, non-religiously friendly policy has been very tacitly deflected by the inclusion of PAS in the new government. Yeah.
Yes. Let's drill down a bit there and recap for ourselves and the participants. Some of the policies on the C19. I think that basically C19 has allowed fairs, sorry, not allowed fairs, and it's not allowed mass opening of fast, but it is allowing open house coming up soon. About 20 people. And that seems to me, I mean, maybe because I'm from Singapore right now, where I'm sitting myself alone, 20 people seems like a lot.
It depends on where you are. I mean, frankly speaking, if you're in a flat or apartments, 20 people is definitely a lot, right? But if you're in a kampong house with a lot of open space, people could ramble around your grounds and so on. And you still theoretically could keep that kind of social distancing.
But then after that, they go not just to one house, right? They'll go to, I don't know, 20 houses a day.
True. That's why you could see the Director General of Medical Services. Well, when he was answering questions about all this, you don't see the enthusiasm in him as with when he was announcing some other news. Yeah.
Okay. I want to come back to Sabah where you're sitting, but right now, actually, I've got an actual physical hand. This is from Gerald Ong, who's the council treasurer, a volunteer like me. So Gerald, is your microphone on? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, hi, Oysan. Thanks very much for the time.
Hi, Gerald.
I actually have a question about the long-term political trends of Malaysia. So I think we've been seeing increasing fragmentalizing of the Malay vote, right? And prior to this new administration, there were certain aspects of it that was disturbing, almost anti-Chinese or anti-non-Bumi, right? So obviously the commonality for all the Malay groups is Islam. Do you see Malaysia heading towards Sharia law, okay, or some kind of form of Sharia law?
Well, I think you will see, just like during the 1980s and 90s, perhaps, shall we say, creeping enhancements of Islamic requirements and so on. But if you ask me whether there will be outright imposition of Sharia law in Malaysia, I think it's highly unlikely. Number one, because you still have a lot of seats, parliamentary seats, which have a high numbers of non-Malays. And number two, as you also suggested, even among the Malays, there are different opinions as to whether you should really go full throttle towards a Sharia compliant, fully Sharia compliant nation. Yeah.
If I could just tweak Gerald's question a bit further. I mean, basically, coming out from a multiracial party, it seemed very little chance of happening. Whereas if we go back one administration to Najib, towards the end, Najib allowed introduction of a bill to be discussed in Parliament about Sharia law. Now, of course, the MCA, etc., opposed it, and Najib, quite cleverly as usual, sort of seemed ambivalent about it. Would that sort of thing be the high watermark, or you think PAS, UMNO, and this new PN creation will go beyond where Najib was?
I think UMNO is UMNO in and of itself is not extremely religiously inspired party, shall we say. It is a party which champions racial supremacy and rights and so on. And that race happens to be Muslims, but it's incidental. So I think UMNO would champion more or try to defend more the special privileges of Malays and so on, but not so much, trying to make Malaysia a Sharia compliant country. Yeah.
But will it go beyond where Najib went? Will Muhyiddin be under pressure to give as much to PAS or more than what Najib gave to them?
Okay. You see this deposing of Mahathir's son Mukhris from Kedah. The flip side of that is, of course, PAS gaining another state to administer, right? And PAS also put forward a new chief minister of Kedah, who is relatively young, even younger than me. So Kedah, it's I'm just using this as a specific example. You know, Kedah is not Kelantan or Terengganu. Kedah is a sizable industrial base in the southern part of it, neighboring Penang in Kulim. So if PAS could indeed sort of present some new faces, such as its new chief minister, who could administer the state well and attract and retain a lot of foreign investors, well, then PAS in itself, despite its religious propensity, well, it's a really, shall we say, a very legitimate party in contending for national aspirations. Yeah.
Yes, certainly. They've also run Kelantan fairly well by most accord and been quite clean in terms of money. So I guess what you're saying is that PAS itself doesn't feel a need to grandstand. It will probably accrue more experience at the state level and push more deeply. Yeah.
Or at least over the past 2 months, but of course the MCO, the movement control order, has something to do with it as well. PAS did not, try to push its religious agenda too aggressively. No.
Okay, good. Let's move on to the next topic. I think this is one where we might bring in your position in Sabah. You mentioned how Sarawak sees it. Sarawak is part of the PN, so they are sort of clamoring for more revenue, more positions, etc. Whereas Sabah has stuck with the opposition. But you mentioned earlier that there might be some rumors. There were rumors that Shafi's state government might fall. How are things looking in Sabah?
Well, yeah, the economy it's not doing well, certainly. Even without this COVID-19 pandemic, Sabah over the years depends a lot on number one, palm oil. Palm oil prices, unfortunately, are not doing well, and then on tourism. But other than that, Sabah does not have a diversification of its economy. The chief minister, Mr. Shafi, has been keen on diversifying it by means of manufacturing and so on. But it's not something that Sabah is used to doing, you know, with car and various other manufacturing. I am, for example, made the chairman of KKIP Aerospace, which is a company aspiring to a state-owned company aspiring to sort of build up the aircraft maintenance industry in Sabah. But then, of course, COVID-19 hit. There's not a lot of aircraft coming here. So in that sense, if there are promises of more prosperity for Sabah, not only the members of parliament, I think even some voters and so on would be very tempted to have better prospects economically. Yeah.
Yes. I think it's COVID-19, generally speaking, has shown how much power the state has got to open up purse, prioritize certain sectors, help other people. And so those who are actually incumbent governments actually have a strong hand. Let's move on to the next question. I think we've covered East Malaysia now. And I think we'd like to ask you a little bit about other parties. In particular, I was interested in the two A's. You know, we've talked about Mahathir and Mohidin. But in coming up to this, there were two A's, Anwar and Azmin, who were very prominent. In fact, in some ways, the more agitating ones, the ones who really were politicking much more actively and visibly. Are they prepared to wait? Especially Anwar is wanting to wait to become prime minister, but to be behind the person who's trying to be prime minister again might seem a bit much.
Yeah, indeed. Over the last week, you have seen Dr. Mahathir, even though he is, in a sense, reconciling with Anwar, but actually the Anwar side, I don't think is very receptive to that. For example, even the motion of no confidence, Anwar and PH did not actually explicitly say we will support that. It's more like a Mahathir motion, which they may or may not go along. And but then they are also at a dilemma, because without Mahathir, they could never make headways both into, shall we say, the MP pools of UMNO, as well as the voter pools in the greater rural Malay constituencies. So they, in a sense, is going back to square one, as with in the year, let's say 2015, when Pakatan Harapan, at that time Rakyat, they will have to go for Mahathir in order to be, in a sense, having some credence, having some trust in the minds of the Malay voters at that time. But even now with Malay MPs from the UMNO pool. Yeah.
And how about Azmin, the man in a hurry?
Well, he is now the de facto deputy prime minister of Malaysia. And Azmin, it's also very shrewd in his political maneuvering. I think he realizes that Mohidin's position is not very strong. So if he keeps a low profile, but still sort of network along the various UMNO politicians and so on, well, then when they want to depose Mohidin, well, he is one of the candidates, right, to replace Mohidin. if rejoining UMNO is not the condition, then why not? I think he and his group could also do that. Yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned him as a de facto DPM. Now, I must have missed the episode of this saga of Game of Thrones because when I looked at the cabinet shuffle, and there were certain sort of senior ministers, and he was just giving back his old portfolio.
Yeah. Then a few days after that, Muhyiddin in a press conference said, just in case I'm not in the country, Asmin would chair all the cabinet meetings.
Oh, okay.
So that makes him the de facto DPM.
All right. But obviously, with this COVID-19, he's not leaving the country anytime soon. Okay. Thanks for that. I didn't know that. Let's try and close off this session on time. And I think there are two different tracks of questions coming up. One is about continued personalities, Dr. Mahathir. And the second is about outside world in both of the investment as well as his relationship with China, which has been changing over time. And you're an expert on this. And to some degree, if you want to talk about Singapore, we'll be happy to hear your views. But first on the personalities. In Singapore, we had a senior minister. Of course, it's all within the same party. And in fact, eventually his son became prime minister. So it's different. But the questioner, a very old friend, Jean-Luc Anglada, asked, is it possible to think about this? For example, Muhyiddin has served and been, in a way, saved from retirement by Dr. Mahathir. Right? And the other way around, Anwar has worked with Mahathir for a very long time.
That's
this
right.
Is there, but in a way, it's exit management for Dr. Mahathir. If either side were to offer him senior minister, and then they themselves are prime minister, you think the man...
I think at the early days of, let's say, the early days of the Muhyiddin administration, I think there were rumors swirling around that that could be the case. But I think Mahathir's condition was, of course, then you can't work with Najib, you can't work with Zahid. That is very difficult for Muhyiddin to accept politically because his coalition support draws heavily from those two factions in UMNO. And Dr. Mahathir's personality is such that, if you make him senior minister, he will be the de facto prime minister, right?
So, I should make no comments about the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
No implication to that. So I mean, put yourself in the shoes of Anwar and so on. You will continue to be chaperoned by this, shall we say, senior figure. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. So let's go for the last question, which is sort of the external view. One of the things you're describing, in a way, is kind of worrying. It's like this saga is also, in a sense, unstable, or at least so confusing and complex. It puts off foreign investment. And right now, especially the world economy, the way it is, foreign investors can get spooked quite easily. So if what you're seeing is that saga, constant change and instability, complex changes, where do you think contracts for investment, investment flow coming in, are they going to be really a problem?
Not really on at least two levels. Number one, on the more, shall we say, politician level, no matter who is in charge, Muhyiddin or Mahathir or Najib, they are all investor friendly, right? It's not as if PAS is in charge today, and even with PAS, as we saw with this new chief minister in Kedah and so on, they're also trying to present a rather investor friendly face. So on the politician level, these politicians, they have different views of each other, but they certainly have very positive views about investments and
can they get it done? Can they provide the kind of capabilities to sign contracts and give confidence?
That brings me to the other level, namely the more bureaucratic level, right? A lot of complaints in Malaysia nowadays, not the least from my own wife, and this cuts across 3 administrations. During Najib administration, Mahathir administration, and Muhyiddin administration, there were a lot of, shall we say, bureaucratic red tapes and so on, which a lot of small and medium businesses, enterprises would have to encounter. And mind you, in Malaysia, the medium enterprises are defined quite widely. You employ up to 200 people, for example. And these are actually quite big factories and businesses, and still they are facing a lot of bureaucratic hurdles in various licenses and so on. Even if Muhyiddin promised you a license, some clerks in some departments could actually block it because they know that Muhyiddin may not be in charge again tomorrow. Yeah.
This problem is getting worse because of the uncertainty and changes of leadership.
In that sense, yes. Yeah.
Okay, it's not getting better, it may be getting worse. And the last part is about China and, if you want, Singapore. Have they been looking at these countries differently, the PM?
Well, I think China certainly looks more positively to this new administration because Dr. Mahathir was rather unpredictable. He could be friendly to you one day and then perhaps he'll make some remarks which you find offensive the next. Muhyiddin would definitely not do such things. And now that the economy is not doing well, this sort of dependence on China's investment would really loom large in the Malaysian business scene, because it doesn't appear that, let's say, the United States or the European countries are investing heavily here. With Singapore, well, Mahathir is gone. Perhaps the relations could, be stabilized more.
Well,
I don't know how I would go beyond that.
We've known Muhyiddin before when he was chief minister. And in fact, the Institute ourselves have hosted him when he was deputy prime minister, first deputy prime minister. I just want to say that I think on the whole, I think many of us in Singapore just think whoever it is, let's hopefully get on with them because this saga, we can hardly understand it if not for your inputs and don't try to hope for the answer we like. Just have to live with the choices that Malaysia makes, whether from the popular ballot or these political party backroom deals. I think that we covered a lot of ground. The one thing we've not talked about, I guess, is the role of the royals. But if the political Game of Thrones was hard to understand for many of us, I think the royal Game of Thrones is, again, something quite deep. Perhaps we can discuss that another day, unless you've got some short notes on that.
Nothing much beyond saying, well, nowadays, be the king of Malaysia, in a sense, we really need to get your hand dirty in terms of like His Majesty did in interviewing all the MPs one by one. You really need to work hard to determine their various political affiliations before you could make a decision. And that's, well, that in a sense, it's nice because it shows that, well, indeed, this is a constitutional monarchy and not an absolute monarchy. Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying to figure out whether there's another question from Elaine Giam. Elaine, we answered your question about China and Singapore. You want to go ahead? Elaine?
Elaine's mic is still not on.
Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with her mic. Elaine, your mic is muted, I think.
No, it's fine. Sorry. Yeah, that's answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, Oisan, as usual, we've had a real breadth and also particular details in your answer. I think that it is always humbling to see how much changes come about after a very stable, long system. Not a perfect system, but when it is gone away, that early sort of breath of hope, the alliance of hope, now there seems to be less of that easy hope, and in fact, less of an alliance. So I'm wondering actually where the shape of politics is going to be in Malaysia, because the structures of UMNO have broken, the Barisan have broken down. They've not really been replaced in any significant way. But we thank you very much for helping us navigate all these details of changes and keeping us up to date on the saga.
you.
May I sign off now and wish you and all the others who have signed on, over 50-something people, all the best for the day ahead and to keep safe. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.